You should find another place to sit. This seat is reserved for someone like me." That cold voice echoed in the first-class cabin, making the previously quiet space suddenly feel suffocating. Olivia Bennett, a black woman, elegantly dressed in a blue suit and carrying a luxurious leather bag, froze when she saw a middle-aged white man sprawled out across 2 seats, including 1E, which she had reserved. "I need this whole row to relax," he declared, then spread a gray blanket over Olivia's seat as if he were the absolute owner. Other passengers began to turn and look, some silently taking out their phones to record, no one daring to speak up, but everyone could clearly feel it. An invisible battle over dignity was silently igniting at an altitude of over 9,000 meters. What he didn't know was the woman he just insulted was the one running the entire airline he was sitting on. Before we dive into this shocking story, please comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss heartwarming stories like this one. Before becoming the CEO of SkyVenture Airlines, one of the largest airlines in the U.S., Olivia Bennett was a child who had to line up for free meals from the public elementary school in the impoverished West End neighborhood of Atlanta. Her mother, Clara Bennett, was a night shift nurse, while her father, a mechanic, passed away from a work accident when Olivia was just 8 years old. Life was tough, but full of discipline, and it taught her a lesson that Olivia would always keep as her guiding principle. Respect doesn't come from money, but from how we act when no one is watching. While her friends were immersed in cartoons or social media, Olivia spent most of her time reading books and learning more about mathematics and economics. She was particularly drawn to stories of women of color overcoming prejudice to succeed, but none of them became CEOs in the aviation industry. And that's exactly why she chose a path that no one expected. After receiving a full scholarship to Howard University, Olivia pursued 2 majors simultaneously: business administration and aerospace engineering, a choice that made many professors shake their heads, saying it was too much. But she graduated with honors, becoming the first woman of color in the school's history to be accepted into the executive management program at Ventra Air International Airlines. Stepping into the predominantly white corporate environment, Olivia was not welcomed with encouraging words. One supervisor bluntly said, "Don't expect to climb high unless you're ready to follow orders." But Olivia did not seek to rebel, nor did she bow down. She chose to work quietly, accurately, and more thoroughly than anyone else. She was the first person on the engineering team to discover a flaw in the aircraft coordination algorithm that senior engineers had overlooked. On another occasion, when a project manager missed a critical plan due to being drunk, Olivia stepped up to lead the entire strategic meeting with the Japanese partners and successfully signed a contract worth $74 million. Despite achieving great accomplishments, she was still seen as only good at her job, not suited for leadership. Many times, Olivia witnessed her white colleagues being promoted simply because they were smooth talkers, while she, despite having the highest evaluation score, was held back with the excuse of lacking leadership qualities. But she never once complained. Every night when she returned to her small suburban apartment, Olivia would look in the mirror and remind herself, "Don't let others decide your worth." Everything truly changed when SkyVenture, an airline undergoing restructuring, invited Olivia to join the Reform Council. In her first presentation, she didn't talk about revenue or market share. She began with a story about a passenger of color who was denied a seat upgrade without any explanation. She presented data on the rate of discrimination complaints in the airline industry and proposed creating a passenger equality rule, the first process in the industry to prohibit any acts of racial discrimination by airline staff. That proposal not only left the council speechless, but also made the sitting CEO step back, conceding the floor to Olivia during the historic vote. Becoming the first female CEO of color at SkyVenture was not a victory of fame, but a testament that those who have been overlooked can reshape the entire system. Olivia never forgot her mother's words. When you rise, bring along those who have been pushed down. That's why, in her 2 years of leadership, she changed hiring policies, expanded the internal scholarship program for students of color, and restructured the entire passenger complaint system to ensure every voice was heard. And today, as she stepped into first class as a passenger, not as a CEO, Olivia carried no title or escort with her. She was just a woman booking a ticket like everyone else, but right there in that most expensive cabin, the contemptuous gaze and cold voice of a strange man brought her past. Rushing back prejudices never really vanish. They just quietly wait for the right moment to resurface. And this time, Olivia was no longer the intern she once was. She was the one in full control. Olivia Bennett walked slowly into first class, exuding her usual calm and confidence. The tailored navy blue suit fit perfectly. Her low-heeled silver shoes and the light brown leather bag hanging casually on her shoulder all conveyed the aura of someone who had represented her country many times at global conferences. But that day, she wasn't there as a CEO, nor did she appear with a retinue or security personnel. She was simply a passenger with a valid ticket, seat 1E, looking to spend a few quiet hours preparing for an important meeting in New York. As Olivia approached the first row of seats, she slowly pulled out her e-ticket from her phone, located her seat, and gave a slight nod to the flight attendant nearby. Emily, the flight attendant in charge of the area, smiled politely, but in her eyes, there was a faint flicker of hesitation, almost unnoticed by anyone. Olivia understood that feeling. She had caught that gaze at high society parties before, a gaze that seemed to ask, "What are you doing here? Someone like you." Just as Olivia placed her hand on the back of seat 1E, a man's voice rang out from behind. "I need this entire row to recline. Please find another seat." The words weren't too loud, but the arrogance in his tone sliced through the atmosphere like a cold blade. Olivia turned around. In front of her was a white man in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair, dressed in a white shirt and an expensive gray jacket. He didn't wait for a response. With a practiced move, as if he was used to dominating, he spread a blanket over both seats, 1E and 1F, then leaned back as if he owned the entire section. "Sir, seat 1E is mine," Olivia said, gently but firmly, holding out her electronic ticket in front of him. The man didn't even look at the screen, just smirked contemptuously. "You must be mistaken. This spot isn't for the common class." A few passengers started to glance back. Some pulled out their phones to record discreetly. No one said anything. Not a single attendant stepped forward. No one stood up to verify. That silence was eerily familiar. Olivia had seen it before, at the bank, during conferences, even at government offices. It was a silence born from prejudice, where everyone knew something was wrong, but no one wanted to get involved. "Someone like you," he emphasized, "does not belong in this section. If you're smart, you'll find another place." The last words made the atmosphere thick with tension. Olivia stood still, her eyes locked on her opponent. She didn't shout. Nor did she react with anger. Instead, she pulled out her phone once more, but this time not to show her ticket. The screen opened to a special internal interface, something only high-ranking leaders of SkyVenture had access to. With a gentle tap, she sent a short code, Silent Wing Phase 1. But in that moment, no one knew what had just happened. She stood there, calm, silent, polite, like any other ordinary passenger being denied their most basic right, the right to sit in their purchased seat. The man, later known as Richard Thompson, the chairman of a major investment firm in Boston, scanned the crowd. He saw no one intervening, heard no flight attendant speaking up. That silence made him believe he was right, believing that he could use his presence to define the space, something he had been accustomed to doing his whole life, imposing. But what Richard didn't know was that he had just made a fatal mistake, not because he took a seat, but because he had just taught an entire cabin and millions outside a lesson that discrimination still clearly exists even in the most seemingly civilized places. Olivia gently put her phone back in her pocket. She did not back down. She stands tall, her gaze firm, exuding a calm demeanor. No one knows she is the CEO, but her composure, in that moment, had everyone in first class holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. And an unexpected confrontation officially began. The sound of the airplane slicing through the wind gently echoed into the first-class cabin, but all eyes were now focused on one spot where the white man sat with his legs crossed, chin resting on his hand, and where the black woman stood silently, not moving an inch. Olivia Bennett, the woman who had spoken before the United Nations, who had successfully negotiated with multinational corporations, was now standing in a cabin full of strangers, denied a basic right to sit in the seat she had reserved. A flight attendant named Emily, with her blonde hair neatly pinned up and a tense expression, slowly approached. She spoke softly. "Excuse me, is there anything I can assist you with?" The seemingly harmless question carried a clear implication, as if Olivia were the troublemaker, not the one being oppressed. Olivia held out her phone once more, the screen lighting up with the clear text 1E, Olivia Bennett. Emily glanced at it, then turned to the man still sitting nonchalantly as if the world outside didn't concern him. "Sir," Emily said, her voice lowered, "Seat 1E belongs to this passenger. I hope you will cooperate." The man, Richard, smirked slightly. "I already told her. I need both seats to lie down. I have a health issue. Don't bother me anymore." Then, to emphasize his words, he pulled out a faded medical report from his pocket, its origin unclear. Emily looked momentarily confused. She glanced at Olivia, then turned to Richard, and looked around the cabin again. No one from the flight attendant team spoke up in support. Neither the team leader nor the crew intervened. The atmosphere grew thick, avoiding glances, quick looks at phones, fingers quietly recording video. Everything created a familiar picture when someone is treated unfairly. The majority chooses to stand aside to stay safe. Olivia remained standing. She didn't scream, nor did she call for help. But inside her, something was stirring. The pulse in her wrist beat softly. Her eyes were fixed on Richard not out of fear, but out of observation. She had encountered people like him many times before, those who believe that money and skin color can buy others' silence. "Someone like you wouldn't understand the concept of class?" Richard spat another comment, this time louder, as if trying to make sure the entire cabin heard. A middle-aged woman in seat 2B raised her eyebrows and looked over. A young businessman in 3A took off his headphones, narrowing his eyes. No one said a word. But the outrage began to spread like static electricity. "You should go back to economy class," Richard continued, his gaze challenging. "Wear that simple outfit is more fitting." Olivia did not respond. She only looked straight into his eyes. That gaze was not angry, but rather the look of someone who had stood on the graduation stage as the valedictorian, despite having once been removed from the study group. It was the gaze of someone who had been denied the opportunity to attend a meeting simply because others did not believe she was a leader. It was the look of someone who understood that to change perceptions, one cannot bow their head, not even once. Emily turned to Richard once more, her tone more urgent. "Sir, we really need you to return to your seat as per your boarding pass. If not, we will have to report a violation." Richard chuckled. "Do you think this airline will choose to believe you or me?" "Trust me, you don't have enough authority." Olivia tilted her head, her gaze drifting to the name tag on Emily's shirt. She softly said, just loud enough for Emily to hear, "Do the right thing." Even if it's just the smallest thing. Emily bit her lip. The pressure weighed heavily. But then she stepped back, not out of fear of Olivia, but out of fear of the system. Fear of losing her job, fear of a chain reaction. Olivia understood that. She had encountered other Emilys in the company hallways, at the reception desk, in the airport cafe, those who wanted to stand up but were swallowed by the silence of the machinery. She took a deep breath, placed her bag down on the floor. Then she slowly pulled out chair 1E, sat down, without asking for permission, without further questions. Some passengers held their breath. Richard gritted his teeth. Emily stood still, saying nothing. At that moment, the cabin speaker announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. Our flight will take off in a few minutes." A brief pause followed. Then Olivia opened her phone, activating another code. The message appeared phase 2. Sent. She didn't need to shout. There was no need to wield power. She just needed to sit in the seat she had purchased and let the world reveal its true nature. And the world did just that. The airplane began to taxi slowly down the runway, the engines rumbling softly like a quiet warning. But inside first class, the noise came not from the engines, but from Richard Thompson, the man smugly seated in 1F, now fully revealing his true self. He turned to Olivia, his voice deliberately raised just enough for the surrounding passengers to hear, "I paid nearly $5,000 for this ticket, and I have no obligation to sit next to someone like you." Olivia turned her head, her gaze not hostile, just as cold as a winter lake. She didn't respond. No need to, because she knew that her silence was the weapon that made people like Richard lose their composure. And he was truly losing it. His face turned bright red, his hand shaking with anger as he saw his opponent not reacting as he expected. "Do you think you're so special? Don't think that just because you have a bit of education or money, you can intrude into the upper-class space," Richard said sharply, as if standing on a familiar pedestal of power. A passenger in seat 2A cleared his throat, turning his head to glare with annoyance. But still, as before, no one spoke up. Olivia took a deep breath. Within her, all the emotions that had been suppressed suddenly surged. Memories of the time she was asked to leave a meeting when she was still an assistant, simply because people didn't believe she was a person of color representing the company. The time security stopped her at the door of Sky Venture headquarters because they mistook her for a delivery person. But this time, she was no longer in the lowest position. She was the one making the decisions, and Richard, the one throwing insults, had no idea. At that moment, a signal of silence passed through the flight crew's intercom system. On the tablet screen of Chief Flight Attendant Kevin Brooks, a middle-aged black man with a serious expression, a notification appeared. Silent Wing Phase 2. Active. Kevin looked at Emily, nodding. No words were needed. They understood it was time to intervene, but by allowing the truth to reveal itself, rather than through coercion. The wireless network on the plane was immediately disconnected, but the chief cabin and Olivia still maintained control through a secure channel. On the control panel, Kevin entered a code following a special protocol high-priority passenger protection, identifier Bennett. Oh. Meanwhile, Richard began to show signs of frustration. "Where's the network? I need to check my email," he muttered as he frantically tapped on his personal device's screen, only to receive the cold message, "Connection not available." "Call the technician. I'm a VIP customer. I can't fly like this," Richard shouted, feeling for the first time in his life stripped of the power he had always taken for granted. But Emily did not respond. She stood still, eyes fixed straight ahead, shoulders back, hands resting in front of her stomach, as if waiting for a command that would not be spoken. At that moment, a deep male voice rang out from the row behind, firm yet calm. "Wait a minute. Is she Olivia Bennett, the CEO of Sky Venture?" That question was like a bomb going off in the tense cabin. Richard turned around, astonished. Olivia remained silent, merely nodding slightly. But that was enough to leave all the passengers in shock. A young woman sitting behind exclaimed, "You mean, she runs this entire airline?" The man nodded. "I just attended a conference where she was the keynote speaker." No one else can speak about fairness and employee restructuring policies with such passion like she does. Richard was speechless. He had never felt so small. Someone he had just loudly insulted, calling her not belonging here, turned out to be the one managing the entire system he was taking advantage of. He swallowed hard, his eyes wavering. But then, like the instinct of an arrogant person, he tried to salvage it. "So what if I'm the CEO? I am a customer. I have the right to demand the best service." She opened her phone and slowly sent the third message. Phase 3. Wait for the signal from the passenger. This meant that the entire cabin system, from the crew's response to ground security, would not react to technical commands, but would wait for the passenger's attitude in the cabin. And that came sooner than Olivia had expected. A middle-aged woman from the back row jumped up, her voice sharp. "I've been sitting quietly, but you've gone too far. She is the CEO, but even if she weren't, you have no right to say someone doesn't belong here." Scattered applause echoed from a few seats away. Another passenger added, "We cannot allow such discriminatory behavior to continue." The gray blanket he once used as a symbol of power now felt like a shroud for the arrogance that had just been exposed. Olivia took a deep breath. She didn't need to say anything more. She had won, not with words, but with calmness, silence, and an unshakable self-respect. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin felt like a thunderstorm waiting to break. Richard Thompson, who had once sat arrogantly with a disdainful look, now shrank in his seat, his face downcast. No one spoke directly to him anymore, but the glances around the cabin felt like invisible blades slicing through the arrogance he had carried. Olivia Bennett sat still, back straight, hands resting on her knees, her gaze quietly looking out the window. But that silence was no longer one of resignation. It was the posture of someone who had won, without needing to stand up. A beep sounded from Kevin's device, the head flight attendant. An internal message appeared. "Activate final stage. Verify passenger identity." Kevin immediately approached Richard, keeping his tone neutral yet authoritative. "Sir, I need to verify your information and seating position as requested by the command center." Richard looked up, his eyes flashing with anger. "Requested by whom?" "Who gave you permission to interrogate me like a criminal?" Kevin remained unfazed. The request came from the executive office of Sky Venture Airlines. Sender O. Bennett. At that moment, the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. Olivia still did not look at Richard, but Richard was looking at her, as if for the first time in his life, he was seeing the true person behind someone he thought he could walk over. In her gaze was confusion, panic, and a hint of something like fear. Who is she?" he stammered. Kevin did not answer, but held up the device for him to see. On it was the profile picture of Olivia Bennett, the current CEO who had led the airline out of the post-pandemic crisis, recognized by Forbes in the list of the 10 most influential women leaders in America. The caption below the photo contained 3 words that made Richard freeze: "Full intervention authority." A passenger in the back row laughed bitterly. "And just a moment ago, he said she doesn't belong here. Now it's clear who really doesn't belong here." Another woman spoke up. We've been silent for too long. We can't let someone like him use his delusional power to hurt others. And then, like a chain reaction, the voices that had been silent surged forth. We demand he be dealt with immediately. Racism shouldn't exist on any flight. We are willing to testify if needed. Richard turned to Olivia, his eyes now pleading. I didn't know you were. I didn't mean to. Olivia turned to look at him, for the first time during the entire journey. Her gaze wasn't hostile, just quietly calm like the surface of water after a storm. It's not about who I am, she said, her voice soft yet clear with every word. It's about your belief that you have the right to treat anyone this way, just because they're not like you. Richard felt as if he'd been stabbed in the chest. He stammered, but I paid for a first-class ticket. Olivia nodded, composed. And so did I, but it seems we differ in our definition of deserving. Kevin at that moment received a signal from the ground system, disruptive behavior identified that may pose a danger, activating safety isolation procedure. He turned to Olivia. Serious Ms. Bennett, do you want us to implement the relocation plan? Olivia shook her head. No need. Everything is unfolding just as it should. Everything is unfolding just as it should. Let him sit there, facing himself. Richard tried to get up to protest, but his legs couldn't lift. He felt as if the cabin was shrinking around him. The looks of contempt, the heavy silence, and the undeniable truth he no longer had control over anything. The Wi-Fi was still down. He couldn't call his lawyer, nor text his assistant. The whole world, which once fit in his pocket, had now vanished. In the distance of the cabin, a young flight attendant whispered to Emily, "Is she really the CEO?" Emily nodded slightly. "Not just a CEO. She is the reason we continue to believe in fairness, in the industry, and in life." Olivia sat still, her gaze directed out the window. The sun was gradually rising in the east, its light spilling through the window, reflecting an indescribable calm on her face. She did not wear a victorious smile, because for her, this wasn't a contest of winning or losing. This was a reminder, to the whole cabin, the airline, and society, that silence in the face of injustice is complicity. The cabin remained quiet, but it was no longer the cold silence of before. It was a charged stillness, signaling a significant change was coming. Richard Thompson, who once loudly ordered flight attendants and looked down on the passengers around him, now sat curled up in seat 1F, gripping his phone tightly as if it were a lifeline. He had tried everything toggling airplane mode, scanning for Wi-Fi, checking his mobile signal. It was useless. The screen still displayed the cold message "not available," access restricted. Technology, power, connections, things that once made him feel invincible, now seemed completely useless. Meanwhile, less than a meter away from him, Olivia Bennett sat calmly, her gaze directed out toward the vast sky beyond the window. No words were needed, no orders given, but no one in the cabin dared to underestimate her presence. A black woman, elegant, resilient, and quiet, became the focal point of respect that no one dared deny. A girl around 8 years old in the back row tugged at her mother's hand, whispering with an admiring tone, "Mom, is she really the CEO?" The mother nodded, her gaze softening. "And remember, she doesn't need to shout to prove her worth." The intercom in the cabin crackled. "We have left the runway. Please fasten your seatbelts and remain seated." The captain's voice was deep and clear, but no one paid attention to that usual announcement. All eyes were still focused on the 2 front rows, where a seemingly small confrontation was overturning all preconceived notions about power and worthiness. Richard began to fidget, discomfort rising as he felt surrounded by stares. He said nothing, but the heavy breaths, The irritated glances and the awkward movements spoke volumes. A part of him began to realize he had gone too far off course. But the other part, the arrogant, stubborn, and evasive part, remained, preventing him from uttering even the simplest apology. Emily, the flight attendant who witnessed the whole incident, slowly walked over to Olivia. There was no longer a worried look or a hesitant tone as at the beginning. Now, her gaze was filled with respect. "Ms. Bennett, if you need us to change the seat for that passenger or report to the control center, I can initiate the process right now." That smile was neither hostile nor competitive. It was simply a calm smile from someone who understood their place and value. "No need, Emily. Just let him sit there. What's meant to happen is already happening." Just then, a new sound rang out, an announcement from the internal security system. Kevin, the head flight attendant, checked the device and spoke in a low voice. "Urgent announcement from the Sky Venture Executive Office. A senior risk management representative will arrive in 20 minutes to assess the situation in person. Any administrative decisions can be made right on the scene." "What? They're sending someone to handle me," he whispered. No one answered, but the looks on everyone's faces gave him a clearer answer than any words could. 10 minutes later, when the plane stabilized at cruising altitude, a man in a dark blue suit, wearing a shiny gold badge, walked into the first-class cabin. It was Alex Murphy, Vice President of Risk Management at Sky Venture Airlines, known for his tough, principled, and uncompromising work style. He stepped up next to Olivia, gently bowing his head. "Ms. Bennett, we have reviewed the report and all the data collected from this cabin. If you permit, I will proceed to address the situation following protocol." Olivia didn't need to respond. She simply nodded, and that nod seemed to put an end to Richard's arrogant performance. Alex stepped in front of Richard, his gaze calm yet piercing. "Mr. Thompson, based on the behavioral data and passenger feedback, your conduct is in serious violation of the airline's human rights and anti-discrimination policies. We will require you to comply with one of two options. 1. Return to your seat according to your registered boarding pass. Or 2. Be isolated and handed over to security upon landing." Richard stammered. You have no right. I will sue. I am a founding member of the Arrow Ridge Investment Fund." Alex did not raise an eyebrow. He simply presented a confirmation letter. "And I am the person authorized directly by the airline's executive board. Currently, Ms. Olivia Bennett is the highest authority on this flight." The first-class cabin felt like it was about to explode. A few passengers clapped softly. Olivia did not move further. She only turned to look at Richard one last time. No resentment. No triumph, just a silent message. "I don't need to shout to make the world listen." Richard Thompson sat silently in his seat, no trace of arrogance left on his face. His eyes were glued to the airplane floor, avoiding all the gazes directed at him. He could feel every heavy breath in the cabin, every shake of the head filled with disappointment, and more than anything, the undeniable presence of Olivia Bennett sitting right next to him, silent yet more powerful than any words. A few minutes after the tense conversation with Alex Murphy, the first-class cabin was filled with murmurs and chatter. But this time, no one was talking about power or status. Everything revolved around a single topic: Olivia's bravery and the downfall of a privileged icon. A woman in her 50s, wearing a white shirt and exuding the aura of a seasoned businesswoman, turned to Olivia and said in a deep, confident voice, "I've been flying for over 30 years, witnessing many instances of unfair treatment, but I've never seen anyone handle it as calmly and intelligently as you. Thank you for teaching me that sometimes you don't need to shout to be heard." Olivia nodded, her smile not a response, but like a gentle ray of sunshine in a gloomy sky. "Thank you, ma'am." But really, I didn't do anything extraordinary. I was just protecting my seat, and the right to be respected like everyone else. Just then, a young man from the row behind leaned forward and spoke up. "Ms. Bennett, I'm an aviation student." Before today, I always thought that airline leaders were out of touch with reality. But today, I understand that there are still leaders who prioritize dignity over profit. Olivia looked at the young man, her eyes sparkling. It's not because of emotion, but rather a silent acknowledgement of what she has always believed, that true power doesn't come from a title, but from action. Meanwhile, Richard begins to realize he is gradually being pushed to the sidelines. Every word, every nod, every glance goes against him. He tries to lift his head, attempting to regain a bit of respect through defiance, but no one responds. Even the previously silent glances now turn away when he looks their way. For the first time in his life, Richard feels what true isolation is. Alex Murphy returns, this time accompanied by a special security officer. "We have received confirmation from the central system." Upon landing, Mr. Thompson will be invited off the plane through a private exit to meet with the company's legal representative. He doesn't need to shout, but those words are heavy enough to make Richard feel as if he's being pulled down into the ground. Olivia slightly leans in, not looking at Richard, just speaking enough for him to hear, "I don't want you to be punished. I want you to understand that feeling sidelined, just once, will change the way you think about what you've said to someone like me." Deep down, he knows she's right. In his privileged life, no one has ever made him feel inferior, until now. And that person doesn't need power or wealth, just the right posture and conviction. Suddenly, the internal message alert rings out. Kevin Brooks receives a signal from the Sky Venture data center. The message displays video data from passengers and internal cameras has been fully recorded. The legal department requests transfer for processing upon landing. The incident is classified as Priority 1A. Kevin nods and turns to Olivia. "Miss Bennett, all data has been collected by the legal system. His name is under investigation." Olivia neither nods nor says a word. She simply exhales lightly, a soft yet deep breath. Everything is moving in the right direction, not because she demands it, but because the truth has its own power. In the back row, a passenger flips open a laptop and starts writing. "I'm a freelance journalist. I will bring this story to light, but in a way that respects the truth. Would you like to share anything, Ms. Bennett?" Olivia simply says, "Write for those who have never had their rightful seats." Not because they don't deserve it, but because no one has stood up to defend them. In that moment, an idea spreads that the story of this flight is not just about a seating dispute. It is the journey of a Black woman, navigating silence, overcoming prejudice, and awakening a new awareness of self-respect, dignity, and the right to be treated fairly throughout the cabin. Just an hour after the tense incident, the atmosphere in first class has completely changed. No one is discussing seating or ticket rights anymore. Instead, the passengers discuss a culture of respect, the role of women of color in leadership, and the necessity of dignity in airline service. Each whispered word is a small cut into Richard's pride, the one who was confident that his status would remain inviolable forever. Richard sits motionless, his hand still gripping the phone even though the screen is no longer displaying anything. He can't reach anyone, can't call his assistant, nor can he post a defense. The Wi-Fi has been isolated from him by order of the technical department, a form of technical isolation the company employs to prevent public disturbance in the air. For someone who once controlled the world with a single touch, the silence of technology now is the most terrible form of punishment. As for Olivia, the one who caused it all, She remains completely calm. She opens her laptop, plugs in her headphones, and starts reviewing her presentation for the important meeting after landing. It seems nothing affects her. No glances, no tension, no noise, but those around her know that this very attitude is the strongest statement. Respect doesn't need to be shouted. It just needs to be shown through consistent actions. A female passenger in the middle row, after watching the video she recorded, looks up and asks, "Ms. Bennett, can I send this video to the media team? I think this story will awaken many people." Olivia muted her laptop and looked at her with sincere eyes. If it helps others understand that discrimination, in any form, needs to come to an end, then share it. Less than 10 minutes later, social media began to explode. Although Richard's Wi-Fi was cut off, other passengers still had access. Twitter was flooded with short clips, in which Richard loudly insulted Olivia, then was asked to back down by Alex Murphy. Hashtags like Mars Olivia Bennett, Sky Venture Justice, Respect over Privilege began to trend. A young passenger named Carlos leaned over to whisper to the person next to him, "He doesn't realize he's up against an entire community." And that's true. In less than 30 minutes, some national news outlets began reaching out to passengers for the rights to use the video. At the front of the cabin, Kevin Brooks received a new notification from the operations department request to protect the image of the VIP customer. Selective media support. "We need to stabilize the mindset of the affected passengers." Kevin walked over to Olivia, nodded gently, his eyes filled with appreciation. "We have received over 50 media requests. Do you want the media handling team to take over?" Olivia thought for a second and replied, "Let them know the truth, but I don't want to turn this into a witch hunt. We should only talk about values, not reputation." Meanwhile, Richard began to sense the undercurrents that were sinking him. A young flight attendant gently placed a glass of water on the table without even looking at him. The middle-aged woman who once tried to protect him now turns away. He secretly opens his phone again, still unable to connect. In Richard's mind, it's no longer anger. It's fear. Fear of the truth. Fear of isolation. Fear of being exposed. He turns to Olivia, his voice hoarse. "What do you want from me?" Olivia doesn't look at him. She simply replies softly, "I don't need anything from you, but you need to take a good look at yourself." In that moment, it wasn't a shout or a declaration of war, but just a reminder, enough for Richard to finally see the reflection he had been avoiding for years. Kevin then receives a message from the ground team. "The Director of Communications for SkyVenture will be waiting at the private entrance to respond to the press as soon as we land. The verified videos have been checked. The incident will be made public." At this moment, in the right-hand row, a young Asian girl is holding her phone, talking to a friend. She is the role model for the next generation of leaders. The friend nods. And that man, he is the model for the privileged generation that is crumbling. The flight continues, but clearly, this is no longer just a simple journey. It is a milestone, where discrimination is named, power is challenged, and self-respect is quietly restored. As the plane slowly descends, preparing to land, the cabin lights change from warm white to pale blue, a signal for passengers to fasten their seatbelts. But in the first-class cabin, all eyes were focused on one place, the front row, where Richard Thompson and Olivia Bennett sat next to each other. Two people, two worlds, now tightly bound together in the same irreversible event. Richard sat silently, his cloudy eyes gazing out the window, which was gradually fogging up. For over 2 hours since the incident, he hadn't received a single sympathetic glance, no words of defense. No one stood by his side. For the first time in his life, Richard felt like a child abandoned, powerless, out of control, with no escape plan. Everything he used to shield his ego, position, money, fame, now became a burden weighing him down, making it hard to breathe. Meanwhile, Olivia remained calm in her demeanor. She gently organized her documents, closed her laptop, and rebuttoned her blazer. No one prompted, no one asked, but the entire first-class cabin seemed to fall silent to observe her every move. No one looked at her as a passenger anymore. Olivia now appeared as a living symbol, resilient, intelligent, and unyielding. As the plane landed, a series of internal messages were sent to the crew's devices. Kevin read quickly and nodded in confirmation. Special exit door number 3 will be opened exclusively for VIP guests. The media response team, lawyers, and the executive vice president of Sky Venture were already present. Everything happened quickly, organized, as if the airline had prepared for this scenario beforehand. The beacon is off. The door opens, but no one stands up. Everyone seems to be waiting for something. Then Olivia unbuckles her seatbelt, stands up gently, and turns to bow slightly to all the passengers. Thank you all for your patience. No one says anything for the first few seconds. Then applause begins, first from the middle row, and then gradually spreads throughout the cabin. It's not loud, it's not explosive. But it's a kind of formal applause, meant for someone who has just triumphed without causing a conflict. Olivia steps out of the plane, where 3 senior staff members are waiting. A female reporter from the local news channel is present, microphone in hand, her gaze directed at her as if waiting for a statement. But Olivia does not step into the camera's view. She only tells the press representative, "I will make an official statement this afternoon at the company headquarters. For now, I want to ensure that all other passengers leave here safely and peacefully." In contrast, Richard Thompson is asked to stay. 2 polite but firm security personnel invite him to remain in the private cabin to wait for legal representation. He struggles, shouting in desperation, "I didn't do anything wrong. I just want peace and quiet. I paid for that peace." But no one responds. He screams into the void like a lost soul, abandoned by the very world he once controlled. When Olivia stepped out into the VIP lounge, the internal communications team had already set up as simple backdrop the Sky Venture logo and the slogan, "Respect is non-negotiable." She paused for a moment, then walked towards the waiting private car. No one stopped her. No one halted the cameras. But every camera captured that moment, a woman leaving the scene of a crisis, as if she had just wrapped up a successful private meeting. Meanwhile, Richard, after nearly 40 minutes with the company's legal department, was escorted off the plane through a side door. But as he stepped into the airport lobby, he was immediately surrounded by flashing lights, rapid-fire questions, and phones held up for live streaming. "Mr. Thompson, do you have anything to say about your actions? Do you think you're becoming a symbol of white privilege? Did you really say, 'People like her don't deserve to sit here'?" Richard shouted. No comment, and quickly wrapped his coat around himself, bowing his head to weave through the crowd. But every action only made him look more like a fugitive, running from the crowd, from the cameras, and above all, from himself. That night, the video of the incident aired nationwide. The online community erupted. Richard's LinkedIn account was locked due to too many violation reports. Posts from a year ago, once moral lessons on leadership, were now mocked and branded as hypocritical. Meanwhile, Sky Venture's official account posted a single line: "We do not tolerate any actions that violate human dignity." A passenger reminded us today, calmly, that respect is not a privilege, but a standard. The next morning, when Richard Thompson woke up in his familiar penthouse, perhaps for the first time in his life, he didn't want to check his phone, but the habit of controlling his life was stronger than his fear. He turned it on, and within 3 seconds, the nightmare became reality. Over 1,200 unread emails, 370 messages, Social media exploded with hashtags Thompson out, privilege exposed, accountability now. News outlets everywhere ran headlines. Richard Thompson condemned by passengers for discriminatory behavior, and investment bank CEO loses power after racial discrimination scandal on flight. Some sources even confirmed the board of directors of the financial group where Richard is the CEO is holding an emergency meeting that day. Richard buried his head on the table, screaming silently. No one was on his side. Former allies, those who used to tip their hats when he entered the conference room, were now completely silent. Calling his lawyer, no one answered. Personal assistant, she has resigned. Her last message was just a single line, I cannot represent that behavior. Meanwhile, in the southern part of the city, Olivia Bennett walked into the headquarters of SkyVenture Airlines with her usual composure. She didn't need to make a statement. The entire communications team proactively organized a press conference, but Olivia had one request. Don't emphasize Richard Thompson. Don't turn me into a hero. This is not a personal victory. This is an opportunity for us to clean up the outdated value system. Everyone nodded, and the press conference began. In front of dozens of reporters, Olivia spoke briefly. Without drama. I believe in an environment where everyone is respected, not because of who they are, but because they are human. SkyVenture will undertake a comprehensive reform. We will not allow any employee to feel confused about choosing between polite and correct. That statement was quoted and spread across social media. The press called it the 21st Century Leadership Manifesto. 3 days later, the SkyVenture board announced an action plan to establish an internal values and culture committee, inviting independent experts in sociology and behavioral psychology to reassess the entire recruitment, training, and conflict resolution processes. Olivia declined all award nominations. I'm not doing this to be recognized. I do this because it should have been done a long time ago. As for Richard, each passing day is another slice of honor stripped away. He was removed from the board of the very company he founded. 3 financial brands cut their consulting contracts. A series of investigative pieces from a major economic newspaper revealed similar past behaviors of his, which had been covered up with money and the silence of the victims. But now, no one is silent anymore. A week after the fateful flight, Richard Thompson appeared at the office one last time to gather his things. No assistant, no receptionist to greet him. The employees who once served him tea now walk past without looking at him. He entered the meeting room, where he had once sat as chairman 15 years ago. Now just an empty chair remains. A printed note, "Thank you for your service. Wishing you all the best." He scoffed. In his mind, the word best sounded like a curse. That afternoon, Richard met with an old friend, someone who used to run a pharmaceutical company that also collapsed after a major scandal. The old friend said just one thing. When you think of power as a weapon, you will always use it to hurt others. But Olivia, she knows that morality is a shield that no one can break. That night, a video interview with Olivia went viral. In the video, she shared the difference between power and privilege is that the former is what we deserve to have. The second thing is something we shouldn't assign to ourselves. The comments below are filled with support. One person wrote, "For the first time, I feel a leader not only talks, but lives by what they believe." Another commented, "Olivia Bennett didn't just reclaim her seat. She regained trust for an entire service industry." 2 weeks after the incident, SkyVenture Airlines began implementing the Touching Humanity program, a mandatory training series for all employees, from pilots to ground staff. The content includes unbiased thinking, social reflexes in service environments, and skills for handling customers in discriminatory situations. Olivia was not just the initiator, She was directly involved in drafting the program with a team of experts, from the content to practical scenarios. In the Great Hall of the headquarters, the first training session took place. Olivia did not sit in the VIP seat. She chose a spot in the third row, between young flight attendants and seasoned technicians. When invited to speak, she simply said, "We cannot choose our customers, but we can choose how to treat them." From today, we are not just representing an airline, we are representing the values of humanity. All applications to join the new board of directors were rejected. The articles he submitted to financial magazines were not published. Old business cards were thrown away, and former close relationships gradually disappeared. A friend who stood by him through dozens of startup projects sent him a single message. "Richard, I tried to protect you, but this time, you brought it all down yourself." Richard tried to find a way to recover. He planned to hold a press conference to apologize, hired a new public relations team, and prepared an emotional speech. But on the day of the appointment, not a single media outlet showed up. A small newspaper agreed to publish the article if Richard covered all the promotional costs, something he had never had to do in his life. In the empty room, watching the camera capture him speaking to rows of empty seats. Richard understood this was no longer about the media. This was about the lost trust, and no one wanted to give it back. Meanwhile, Olivia received handwritten letters from the audience every day at work. A 12-year-old girl wrote that she wanted to become a CEO like her, and an elderly white man shared how he had remained silent when he saw others being discriminated against, and now he wanted to stand up and speak out. She read each letter, folded them neatly, and placed them in a small box on her desk. Each letter was a reminder she could not afford to be tired, because the fight for dignity did not stop at one flight. At a seminar on women's leadership and social justice, Olivia was invited to be the keynote speaker. When she took the stage, the audience stood up and applauded continuously. She did not talk about herself. Instead, she shared the story of a 27-year-old flight attendant who had been insulted by a passenger but still maintained her professionalism. She has no title, but she is the leader in that moment. The whole auditorium fell silent. People realized that Olivia wasn't taking the spotlight for herself. She made everyone a part of a bigger story. Meanwhile, Richard gradually stepped away from the spotlight. Every time he went out, there were familiar gazes recognizing him. It's no longer the polite greetings, but strange looks, half pitying, half mocking. When he goes to the supermarket, people step aside to avoid him. He visits the old restaurant, but no one is there to bow and greet him. The name Richard Thompson is now associated with a lesson, rather than a financial brand. One night, he reopens an old video, a clip of Olivia silently looking at him when her seat was taken. In that moment, her eyes showed no hatred. It only had one thing, the belief that the truth will defend itself. He turned off the video and sat still for hours. For the first time in his life, Richard admitted that the man in the footage was the worst version of himself. The next day, he wrote a letter, not sending it to the press, nor posting it online. Just a handwritten note, addressed to Sky Venture headquarters, to the attention of Olivia Bennett. In the letter, he makes no excuses, offers no blame. Just a final line. "Thank you for not screaming that day, because that silence has echoed within me until today." Olivia read the letter, but did not respond. She simply folded it carefully, placing it alongside other letters in a wooden box on her desk. Then she continued preparing for the strategic meeting the next morning, where she would propose changing the entire selection process for the middle management team. On Monday morning, the main conference room at Sky Venture was packed with people. More than 30 senior department directors, advisory board members, HR experts, and legal representatives were present. Olivia Bennett walked in with a thin folder, without an accompanying assistant. On the opening slide, the brief title read, "New Leadership, New Culture." All eyes immediately turned to her. In the past 10 years, Sky Venture has made tremendous strides in technology and revenue. But our leadership culture still carries old traces of privilege, of distance, and of silence in the face of injustice. Olivia began, her voice calm and assured. The incident on the flight 2 weeks ago was not an isolated case. It is the clearest signal that we need to change from the ground up. She presented a proposal to overhaul the middle management leadership system. Every manager from department head and above must participate in a program to reassess their ethical competence and cultural governance ability, not just through KPI reports, but also through real-life situations regarding conflict resolution, responses to discrimination, and emotional presence before employees. A leader needs to have not just reasons, but also trust. And trust does not come from power, but from human dignity, she said. Someone in the room frowned. Some old-timers exchanged glances, unable to hide their unease. But no one opposed her. No one dared to speak against a woman who had just made the entire airline industry rethink how to treat customers and employees. The voting took place immediately afterward. 31 votes in favor, 2 abstentions. No one opposed. The proposal was approved. At home, Richard Thompson sat silently in front of his computer screen, watching the live news about the Sky Venture meeting. He saw Olivia, her voice, not angry, not accusatory, but each word like a sharp knife cutting into the pride he had built up for 40 years. Every word she spoke was a conclusion for the old style of leadership he once represented. At that moment, on the phone, Richard received a notification. The stocks of the financial group where he used to be. The chairman continued to decline after the board officially announced the severance of all ties with him. Some major investors posted analysis articles. The era of leaders lacking empathy has ended. Richard closed his eyes. For the first time, he did not refute. He did not place blame. He only felt a vague emptiness creeping deep into his spine. Back at Sky Venture, the effects of the new culture program began to spread. Departments were asked to hold open discussions, no hierarchy, no minutes taken, for employees to share their feelings about the work culture. From the maintenance technical team to the reception staff, everyone had the chance to voice their opinions. A veteran flight attendant said, "I have worked here for 18 years. This was the first time I heard the regional director sitting and listening to me recount a time I was scolded by a client without anyone defending me." Olivia didn't attend all the meetings, but she read every summary report, every note, every proposal, and used them to rebuild the training and reward policies. She believes culture is not in the rules. It lies in the smallest behaviors, repeated until they become identity. During those days, she received a quietly sent package with no sender's name. Inside was an old plane ticket, seat 1E, crumpled and then pressed in acrylic. Accompanied by a note I used to not understand your silence. Now I understand. It is the strongest voice I have ever heard. She held the ticket in her hand, saying nothing. She gently placed it next to a photo of her mother, who taught her that maintaining dignity is harder than maintaining achievements. But that is the one thing you must never lose. Now, each line suddenly felt heavy, not because of the novel content, but because he realized what he once considered weakness, humility, silence, yielding, turned out to be what he had never learned throughout his life. Richard no longer planned to make a comeback. No press conference, no brand restructuring. He knew that his time had passed, not because of a scandal, but because of a society that was maturing. In the notebook, he wrote a single line. The greatest price to pay is not losing one's reputation, but being seen by the world for who you really are. They only remember him as a symbol of an outdated, privileged era, replaced by more righteous values. Meanwhile, the name Olivia Bennett has become the new voice for ethics in business. There was no need for fanfare, no need to compete for the spotlight, just consistent actions and calmness in the most tense moments. At the 25th anniversary celebration of SkyVenture Airlines, Olivia was asked to speak before all the employees and strategic partners. She stepped onto the stage, with no backdrop, no formal music, just a white screen and a microphone. She began with a story that was not in the plan. When I was young, I was refused service at a store because I didn't look like a customer with money. I didn't say anything. A few years later, I returned to buy out the entire row of stores, not to retaliate, but to ensure that no other child had to stand outside the door as I once did. The auditorium fell silent. No one clapped. Everyone was holding their breath. Olivia continued. But if that day I had just stayed silent and moved on, the injustice would repeat itself. So, I stayed, not to argue, but to remind seating, titles, or status do not define dignity. It's how we react to injustice that defines who we are. After that speech, a number of airlines, financial institutions, and tech companies began to model their human-centered leadership after SkyVenture. Prestigious business schools included Olivia's story in their required curriculum, but what makes her most proud isn't the titles or the awards. It's a handwritten letter from a passenger who witnessed the events that day. Thanks to you, I learned how to stand up against wrongdoing, even when standing alone in a crowd. For Olivia, that is the true legacy. It's not found in texts or strategies, but in the awareness of each individual. That legacy began with a small act, not backing down in the face of insult. From there, it grew into a movement demanding the right to respect for everyone, whether they are customers, employees, or leaders. As for Richard Thompson, he still lives, but quietly. Old relationships have turned into mere birthday greetings of polite formality. His name no longer appears in conferences or is quoted in the news. In a rare appearance at a community book fair, he stood alone among the shelves of Leadership and Humanity, reading each line in silence. A young student recognized him, not condemning, just giving a slight nod. Richard nodded back, for the first time with eyes free of arrogance. Olivia Bennett never sought to reconcile with him, but she also held no grudges. For her, justice isn't about revenge. It's about someone who has been wrong realizing their mistakes, and a society that sets clear moral boundaries. She believes that significant change doesn't come from momentary outrage, but from quiet, relentless determination. Every morning, Olivia still sits working next to the wooden box containing letters. Inside, there's even a 1E boarding pass that's been pressed flat, along with letters from passengers, students, and new employees in the industry. For her, it's not just a memory, it's also a responsibility. A responsibility that reminds her every day someone is being rejected just because they don't fit the mold, and she, with her silent presence, will always choose to stand by them. As the sun sets over the SkyVenture office, Olivia stands by the glass window, watching the row of planes lined up on the runway. The evening sunlight casts a glow on the glass, creating a reflection of a woman, not angry, not afraid, just the calm of someone who knows she's preserving something greater than success, human dignity. The story ends here, but the message remains. No matter who you are, where you come from, or where you sit on the flight of life, always remember, no one has the right to value you based solely on appearances. And if one day, someone tries to take your seat with contempt, stay silent if you wish. But don't walk away, because sometimes your silence is the loudest voice the world needs to hear. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you won't miss any touching stories about courage and justice. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.